Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I thought I would share with you my after-birth care that I received in the hospital. So this is everything that happened after I gave birth. So I would highly recommend you go and check out my birth story first of all if you haven't seen that, because that story this story kind of directly follows on from what happened then. So I will link that here and you can go and check that out first if you haven't seen it already. Just for a bit of context, I gave birth in an NHS UK hospital, and this was during lockdown. So if you're watching this far in the future, then this was during the COVID pandemic lockdown. And so I thought it'd be really interesting just to share with you what that experience was like. And if you're going into hospital anytime soon in the UK, then this might give you an idea of what to expect. I will say though, like I said in my birth story video, this is not a completely typical experience of labour and delivery, because I did end up in a transitional ward and with my baby in the neonatal unit. So that's slightly different than if you were to go and give birth and have like a normal birth, like not a normal birth, but more of like a straightforward birth. If you were in a straightforward birth, you would go on to in the UK anyway, in Scotland, you would go on to the labour and the postnatal ward afterwards, which is a ward with a bunch of other people in the same room. What was different about my experience was that I ended up in a room by myself in a different part of the hospital for people whose babies can't be next to them for whatever reason. So that's slightly different. So I thought this would be interesting for you guys to watch anyway, even if you're planning on having a pretty straightforward birth. And I'll just share with you all the rules and stuff that were in place around the lockdown and the COVID pandemic as well. I thought that'd be kind of interesting to talk about. So without further ado, let's get into my experience. So if you can remember from the end of my last video, I finished off basically telling you that I'd given birth. I gave you a bit of context about what happened with my baby. And what happened after this was they did what they always do in hospital, and they brought me tea and toast to have after I gave birth. I drank the tea. I was really thankful for the tea because I really love tea, and I was really dehydrated. I don't know whether it was just the gas in the air or the adrenaline or everything, but I was so dehydrated. And so I drank the tea, didn't eat the toast. There was tons of toast. Philip didn't eat any really. I had like a corner just to be like polite. Such a British thing, isn't it? Even after you've just given birth, you're going to have like a tiny bite of your toast just to be polite. So British. So I didn't really have the toast, and straight after that I had a shower. So I was still in the labour room at this point. I was still like kind of naked and just recovering from the aftermath of like a quite traumatic birth that I had, and my legs were like shaking. I remember that my legs were like so shaky, like I couldn't I had to like let all that settle down and like relax a bit, like rest all my muscles from like the intense experience that I just had. And then once I'd relaxed from that a bit, I went and had a shower, which was amazing. With my first birth, the woman told me not to wash my hair. This time she was like, go and have a shower, do what you need to do to make yourself feel better. So I went and had a shower. Philip helped me a lot because I was still in a lot of pain, of course, because I just gave birth. I'd just given birth. And so yeah, they gave me medication, and the stitches and stuff were still numb, so it wasn't too bad. And I had my first shower after birth, which was delightful. It was so nice. And this whole kind of resting kind of time after birth, during this whole time my baby was away being looked after in the neonatal unit, in the neonatal intensive care unit is what it's called. And that's where my baby was, and I couldn't see him straight away. I like had to sort myself out and get a shower, and about 4 or 5 in the morning, I believe, so remembering I gave birth at 1 in the morning, I went and saw the baby about 4 or 5 in the morning with Philip, and it was really sad to see him hooked up to all those machines, and it was quite upsetting to see him like that, of course. You don't want your baby to be all hooked up to machines and stuff. That was quite sad. I will say, in terms of wearing masks, so this is the first kind of rule that you might not know about the pandemic, but in Scotland, in the hospital I was in, so just in case you might be giving birth in the same hospital, the hospital that I gave birth in was Wishaw General, and this is the rules at the time that I gave birth. But basically I didn't have to wear a mask during labour, and I think that's across the board for everyone. It's in every woman that's in labour in the hospital doesn't have to wear a mask. Philip did have to wear a mask from the moment he entered the hospital. He had to wear a mask. And then once I'd given birth and when I was moving around the hospital, so like going from the labour room to the neonatal ward, I had to wear a mask from there to there, and also in the neonatal unit. So I wore a mask all those times. When I was in my room by myself, I didn't have to wear a mask. Philip had to wear a mask even when he was in my room, but I didn't have to wear a mask. So that was actually okay. I didn't mind that too much. The thing that did make me sad was that my baby, when he wasn't awake the first time I visited him, but the second time I visited him, he was awake. And I was sad because he couldn't see his mummy's face. That made me a bit upset at the time, because he'd been alive for like a day by that time and he hadn't even seen my face, because the first time he was all kind of on the oxygen mask and everything and he didn't see me, and then the second time, yeah, he didn't see my face because I had a mask on, and I thought that was quite sad. But I understand why these things were necessary, and I wasn't really that bothered by the whole mask regulation in general. So going back to the first time that we met our little one in the neonatal unit, he had all the wires hooked up to him and his little oxygen mask in his face and his little cannula in his hand, and it was so sad. But we were able to wash our hands well and to touch him like through the little window bit, and yeah, it was sad. One thing I didn't like was that the machines kept beeping. Like every time he moved, it seemed to like disconnect some kind of wire and the machine started beeping, and that really freaked me out every time they did that. Obviously the staff in the hospital were not that bothered by it because they were used to it, but it stressed me out every time the machines were beeping, because they would get disconnected and then they would say, oh, his heartbeat's dropped, and then it would beep really loudly and stress me out a lot. So I didn't like that. That was not a fun part of the experience. So after about an hour of looking at him in the neonatal unit, we had to go back to the ward. I was really tired. We went back to what I said earlier was called the transitional ward, I think, ward 22, and it was separate to the ward where they have all the mothers who have given birth more in a more straightforward way and who have their babies next to them. So I went back to my own room, which was really nice to have my own room, especially because I couldn't have my baby next to me. And so we went back there, and then Philip was still with me at this point. And then at this point, they kind of came into the room and were like, okay, Philip has to leave soon because he's technically only meant to be here for like until the birth. And by this point it was almost 6 AM. And so they'd been very nice about it and been very like relaxed with the rules, but of course he had to kind of leave at some point. And I think Philip was happy to go home because he was tired. I mean, he's barely been awake for like half a night and he was exhausted. Typical men, like you've just given birth to a human child and they're like, the man's like, I'm exhausted. So anyway, he was quite happy to head off home just after 6 AM. But just before he left, the doctor that was kind of in charge when I was giving birth, because like I said, my birth story video, in the UK you usually only give birth with midwives around you if you're having a straightforward birth. Because I had an emergency situation, they had called doctors and like other people as well. So this is the doctor that was in charge of my care. She came and gave me like a quick debrief, like a really quick debrief. When I say quick, she like fired through what had happened really quickly, basically telling me what had happened, because although I was there, obviously I didn't actually know what they did, and a lot of things they did quite quickly and they kind of made decisions really fast. And so they had to debrief me afterwards and tell me exactly what happened. And I did find one thing, that every time I talked to someone else, whether it was a consultant or a doctor or someone, they gave me another piece of information I didn't realise, or something that I didn't know before. So she kind of came and debriefed me really quickly and kind of gave me all the information I could get from her, which was really helpful. I really liked that. That was really useful. Then Philip left, and then after that they did a COVID test. So they did that horrible like throat and nose swab thing, which was lovely. The lovely midwife that was on duty actually was really apologetic about it, and she said she felt really awful doing it because I'd been through such a lot already that evening, but she kind of obviously had to do it, obviously with my consent. And so it wasn't like the worst thing in the world, it was okay. But yeah, so I did have to take a COVID test, and she did tell me that usually they do it on admission, but obviously because of the emergency situation there wasn't time to do that before. So around 6 AM was when I got my COVID test. Then after Philip left, I kind of rested. I tried to get some sleep, but I didn't manage to get any sleep because I was so full of adrenaline. And because my labour wasn't a long labour, and it was an intense labour, but it wasn't a long labour, so my body was full of adrenaline, but it wasn't exhausted in the way it was with Samuel. So I kind of just rested until 10 AM, which is when I went back to see the baby. Philip hadn't come back by that time, so I went by myself to see little Noah, and it was really sad. Like I said, he couldn't see my face because of the mask, and I did get to hold him. I got some skin to skin time with him, but it was just honestly really upsetting because he had his nose thing on his nose, so you couldn't, and he really hated it. You could see he really hated it. He kept taking it off, and it kept making horrible noises in the machine. And then he had this little thing in his hand, like needle cannula thing in his hand, which he kept trying to take off, and little things all over him which he kept trying to take off. Like, he hated all of these things on him. He was like, "Mummy, take it all off." And it was really sad because he was like looking at me like, "Mummy, take it off," and I couldn't take it off. And then he was also like looking to be breastfed, and I couldn't breastfeed him because he was still on the oxygen and stuff, and he was like looking at me like, "Mummy, help me." And that was really sad because I couldn't really help him. He was just so tiny and just had to be looked after by the tubes and everything at that time. And so although it was nice to hold him, it was more upsetting than it was happy because of how upset he seemed. Also, his little skin was all scratched because he came out with really sharp pointy nails, and they didn't put anything on him because they had to like check. I think they have to, in the neonatal unit, they have to like make sure the skin's okay so they don't have clothes on and stuff. And so he'd like scratched all over his little body with his nails, and because of the airflow, I think, in the little incubator things, his skin was so dry. Like, his skin even today is so dry, and it's like shedding and finally getting softer skin beneath it. But especially his feet, they were like all cracked because of the purity of the air, I think. And it was just sad, like a sad state to see him in. So I stayed a couple of hours with Noah there, and then I went back to my room, and then Philip arrived and we both went back across to see the baby again. And I'll tell you now about the rules around, because of COVID, around the whole neonatal unit transitional ward. Basically the rule was that he was able to stay for 3 hours with me inside my room in the private ward, and he could go and see Noah for as long as he wanted in the neonatal ward. So how we kind of worked it was, we spent a bit of time in my room, and then we went across to the neonatal ward, and then we stayed there for quite a long time. And then we came back, we spent some more time in my room, and honestly, the midwives were lovely. They kind of turned a blind eye. I'm pretty sure he stayed much longer than he was actually technically allowed to stay, but they didn't really bother. And because we were in a separate private room, I think the rules were more relaxed than they might have been on the labour ward, because there were, on the labour ward, generally around other people, but because we were in our private room, like, he wasn't coming into contact with anyone. What difference does it make, really? So I was really happy with how relaxed the rules were and how much he was able to stay, and I'm so glad that he was allowed to stay for as long as he wanted in the to see Noah if he wanted to see Noah. And if he had to stay there longer, that would be a really good thing, I think. Another thing that I asked, which I was really happy about, again, if we'd had to stay longer in the hospital, this was really important to me. And basically I asked if the baby has to stay in the neonatal intensive care unit for longer, can I stay in the hospital for as long as the baby? Because of course I want to be as near to the baby as possible. And basically the answer was yes. As long as the baby's in the neonatal unit, depending how long that is, you're generally allowed to stay there in the hospital for as long as they are there, which I found really comforting and lovely, because I didn't want to be sent home and not have my baby with me, kind of thing. I wanted to be near him all the time. And because I was planning to breastfeed, that was important as well. So yeah, that's kind of like the whole rules around that. While we were in the neonatal unit, the consultant came and told us all about the baby's condition at time of birth, which was scary to hear, and you can check out my birth story for the full details of that. But basically I was able to then breastfeed the baby a little bit because he took him off the oxygen. They started to take him off the antibiotics as well. And yeah, he was just doing a million times better. And the consultant was very professional, very helpful, just like every other member of staff that we dealt with during my birth experience. They were all lovely people, really helpful, really kind, and really honest, which I think is very important, because while you want people to be kind to you and nice to you and reassure you, it's also very important to have honesty, and when they tell you honestly what a situation is like, I also value that and think that's very, very important, especially in, of course, in medical professionals. And the way they did it was really lovely. So I would not fault any single person that we came into contact with. They were all amazing, and they were all just lovely, helpful, kind, professional people. So I can't fault any of the NHS staff that we came into contact with, because they were all amazing. So by this time it is Monday evening, and so Monday evening I was able to have Noah in my room. So that's how quick he went from being in such a scary condition to being discharged to my room, because he was taken off the oxygen and he was just on some antibiotics. He could spend the whole night in my room with me, which was lovely. And so we just spent time having skin to skin, getting to know each other a little bit in my room. And Philip obviously couldn't stay that night because he was not allowed to stay at night time. But we spent a lot of time together then. They basically spent a lot of time in I said it was nice to spend time with baby, of course it was, but I didn't get any sleep really. Because every time I started to go to sleep, they came in to do like a check on me or on the baby, or to give the baby antibiotics or to take blood tests from the baby. There was still a lot of checks to be done on the baby. And so I didn't sleep that whole night either. So that night was nice, but also really, really tiring. And then the whole of Tuesday was just really relaxed and trying to just recover a bit more. I was prescribed iron tablets because I lost a lot of blood during birth. But I didn't need a blood transfusion because I didn't lose that much. So I was taking iron tablets. The pain relief that I was given was 2 paracetamol and an ibuprofen. I could have had something more strong, something stronger, but the things that they offered me, I think it was cocodamol or something like that, made me sick during labour last time. So I was really quite scared of taking that. So I didn't take that. I'd rather have a little bit more pain than feel sick. So that's the pain relief that I was offered, and I was taking it every 5 hours maybe. And I did continue to take that pain relief for a good couple of weeks after birth because it was very, very painful, those stitches. They continued just to check the baby and to check me over, take my vitals, take blood pressure, all that kind of stuff, and just keep an eye on us basically that whole day. And that was really nice to kind of be reassured that I'm okay, baby's okay. I was quite happy to stay in that length of time with baby because I was a bit nervous about the baby because he was so small and so fragile he seemed because of all the time we'd spent hooked up to the machines. I was like kind of scared to touch him and scared to do anything because I was just scared. So I'm glad we got to spend that extra time in the hospital just to make sure, to give me peace of mind that everything was okay. He also did get his hearing test and both his ears were fine. His hearing test came back perfectly. He got like a reflex test I think as well, and then like they checked his eyes and they checked loads of different things. I can't even remember exactly what they checked. They seemed to be coming in and out all day that day checking things on the baby. So that was good. I will also mention the food. The food was better than last time, but I think that's because I made better choices than last time. We did get a choice of what food we wanted, and I tended to choose the slightly more processed stuff, which tended to be kind of better. With my first birth, I ended up choosing things with like vegetables and potatoes, and they tasted like plastic. So this time I chose things like sandwiches and chicken Kiev, I think I chose. And I chose, what else? And a yogurt for dessert, that kind of thing. So things that you couldn't really mess up. So I would say that the food was okay, better than last time, but the food was not enough, nowhere near enough. Like, if I had out of my snacks, I would be starved. So definitely take your snacks if you're going into hospital to give birth and you might stay there a bit longer afterwards. Highly recommend snacks. But the food was not awful. I can't really complain. I can't fault the food, but it was just not enough food. And then later on the Tuesday, about 5 p.m, we were discharged. And we weren't forced out the door, we weren't told we needed to leave now, and we also weren't like, oh, you must stay extra. It was kind of like a gentle nudge, like, yes, you can leave kind of whenever you want. So I really appreciated that. They did everything very tactfully, the team in the ward that I was at. Really, really lovely, like I said. And that was kind of it. We went off home. And so that was all our care in the neonatal unit and in the transitional ward. I hope this information was helpful to you and interesting to you. I'm sure that I've probably forgotten a couple of details here and there. So leave me a comment down below if you have any questions and I will answer you. And yes, I will see you very soon in my next one. Bye guys.